Blender 5.2 has been released and brought a lot of updates to its compositor. So naturally, I've made sure to work on an update for MP-Comp. If you don't already know, MP-Comp is my free and open source compositing pack for Blender, which features over 150 different node groups. So let's go over the new features and fixes of MP-Comp version 4. Since this update marks the release of a new major version, I've made sure to replace the thumbnails accordingly to reflect the new version number. And since we got the ability to add text elements in the compositor now in Blender 5.2, I've used this opportunity to add the name of each effect to the thumbnail. This only applies to the thumbnails that show the effect using the MP-Comp example image, as I felt like those can sometimes be very hard to tell apart at small resolutions. For the generative effects, that didn't always feel necessary, as they are much easier to tell apart, which is why I decided to leave them without the additional text element. Blender 5.2 also seems to have changed the behavior of clipping in the compositor, which is why a lot of MP-Comp effects have been broken in 5.2. So I've made sure to fix the affected node groups in this update. In most cases, this was achieved by adding the clip input toggle you might already know from other effects of MP-Comp to each node group. Essentially, this will help to make sure that textures in the MP-Comp node groups will be displayed at the same scale as the input image by clipping the input image to the visible render resolution. But let's move on to the first completely new effect of this update, MP_liquid glass. Using this node group, you can create glass-like 2D elements in your composition, which are able to distort and blur everything that is behind them. To use this effect, you will need any input image where you want to put a glass element on, and a mask which will define the shape of your glass element. To easily create a few interesting masks, you can use the SDF nodes of MP-Comp. For example, you can add MP_box SDF and connect its mask output to the mask input of MP_liquid glass to have an adjustable 2D rectangle shape as your glass element. Or you could even use Blender 5.2's new string to image node as a mask. Just type in your desired text and choose any font to get a glass-like text element. Using the inputs of MP_liquid glass, you also have a lot of options to customize your glass element. You can colorize your glass element by picking a color and then configuring the opacity of it, adjust the rim thickness to control the width of the slight highlight effect on the edges of your glass element, use distort and dispersion to create a slight reflection-like effect on everything behind the glass, and you can also adjust the blur to control the milkiness of your glass. I've also added the ability to choose different blur algorithms here. By default, it will use fast Gaussian as it doesn't demand much performance, but feel free to play around with other blur algorithms here. I've also added a slight customizable lighting effect to the node group, where you can control the angle, distance and intensity of a 2D light. The input image is also being mirrored and put on top of the glass element at a weak opacity to mimic a reflection effect. You can control the strength, distortion and blur of this reflection in the reflection panel of MP_liquid glass. Optionally, you can also toggle an outline for the glass element. You can control its thickness and its color by choosing from 3 different coloring modes. The default one is base gradient, which is a black and white gradient that wraps around the object, of which you can adjust the angle and contrast of. Alternatively, you can also switch the mode to just use a single color, or use the custom input to use textures and custom gradients on the outline. One thing that used to be missing in MP-Comp was a proper kaleidoscope effect. So I've added one called MP_kaleido. Using this node group, you can create customizable symmetry effects. The key setting here is the reflection count, which controls how many different instances of your input image will be visible. This input will be influenced by the mode you set the reflection type to. By using the default harsh setting, you will only be able to use integers for the reflection count. This makes sure that all reflections are evenly sized, but will also mean changing the value will look very snappy. So if you want to animate this value, you might prefer setting the reflection type to smooth, which will use a float input for the reflection count. This will look smoother when changing the value or animating it, but might make one of the reflections smaller than the others. And of course you can also offset the center of the kaleidoscope effect and also rotate the reflections. The rotation is also pretty fun to play around with and is very useful if you want to animate the kaleidoscope effect over time. You can also control the zoom of the effect and add a pinch-like distortion to the kaleidoscope by using the perspective input. And by using the seam smoothness value, you can control how hard the cutoffs between each reflection should be. So 0 would mean the seams of the reflections aren't smoothed at all, and higher values will increase the fall off between reflections. The next completely new effect is MP_transform, which combines all the transform essentials you know from other software into a single node group. So you can easily adjust the position and scale of an image using relative values, but also do more complex transformations like skewing and perspective tilt. And by being able to adjust the pivot point of the transforms, you can, for example, set the node group to scale its input toward one of its edges. On top of that, it also has MP_com's mirrored extension method integrated. The only limitation of this node group in comparison to Blender's transform node is that the input image will be clipped. So if parts of your input image are off canvas, you can't use MP_transform to move them back into the canvas, as these parts of the image have been clipped. And for the last new effect of this update, we have MP_typewriter text. By using this node, you can remove and reveal each character of a string after another. You just have to put its output into a string to image node for the text to display. These have been all of the contents of this MP_comp update. I initially planned to include more new features, but some things took longer than expected. However, I decided the fixes of this update are pretty important for MP_comp to be used in Blender 5.2, so I will release other initially planned features in a future update instead. Well, that was everything from my end. Make sure to like and hype this video and to submarine to my channel. Have a wonderful day, bye.